We were discussing the art of drawing, and we went over a couple of techniques on paper, and I like to emphasize the relationship between drawing and painting. And when we think of painting, most of the time we think of canvas, because that's really what painters work on. There's a lot of advantages to working on canvas because, first of all, it's very tough. This is a number 10 cotton. You can buy cotton in economic rolls. It's really a great material to work on, kind of like the Stonehenge paper I showed you earlier. Cotton is very, it's got a nice texture to it. You got the weave of the canvas, and like really tough paper, you can use a brush with some aggression. You can use your hands. You can use sandpaper. I discovered a number of years ago when you're drawing on canvas like this, you can see how you can get a nice gray and rub it in. You can also sand it out. See how that changes the quality of the shade? Depending on the surface, and then you can sand it out. The other pal, while working on canvas, a little water. You can then see how the pencil from the other, I still have pencil, graphite and charcoal in the brush. See what that does. And sometimes it helps to use a wet brush and a dry brush. It's a common thing. You'll see the velvetiness when you mix charcoal and graphite. You get the idea. See how that contrasts there? You got two great grays. You can also draw into wet canvas, which is something you can't do much on paper, but see how this dampness? See how beautiful that black line is? You can then start to, and all you got to do is let that dry. See the difference when you're on dry canvas and the difference on wet canvas. Now, can you think of any artists who would have done that? Miro probably comes to mind, Picasso, a lot of the greats from the 20th century. And again, why am I working on canvas and not in there's so much more freedom in this. My orientation changes as I lower my head and I look towards the corner, and I have an area of sunshine over here. I can use this area of sunshine in my drawing. Now, you get the idea. Again, we're looking at shaded areas versus quality of line. See what happens with the line. I bring a little graphite next to the charcoal. You can start to suggest maybe a current of some kind. See the paleness of the gray? There's a nice paleness there. Okay. Now I'm going to show you another trick that I use a lot of. A friend of mine out on Long Island developed this product. These are monoprint acrylic inks. These things are like dynamite. There's a lot of pigment in these. I've only recently started using them. If you're familiar with paints at all, You probably know Liquitex or golden acrylics. This is actually more concentrated than the acrylic paints you'll buy. So if you're doing a drawing on canvas or a painting, or I call them drawings, you might want to, so I'm going to show you quickly what you can actually achieve with some of this. Obviously you mix it with water. It's non-toxic, so you don't have to worry about getting it on you. And it dries relatively quickly. Here's some of the black in an old tuna fish can, a little bit of water. Now, when you're working on canvas, you're pretty much free. You might want to get a sense of where you're at. You see the blackness there, and the blackness, it kind of matches the charcoal, but there's a little bit of difference. So you might want to try a little. Do you see how these lines come out? And you might want to contrast these lines with something a little paler. Again, you're going for that light versus dark effect. You also, if you wet an area, you can shade an area like this, wet it like that, come into your little forms here, build up your form. And when you have a nice wet area, then you have this. You see? Do you see the blackness there? All the surrealists during World War I were playing around with these techniques. You know, Max Ernst took a big can and he pounded a bunch of holes in the bottom and he put the paint in the can and swung the can around. There's endless ways that you can get effects. Again, if you're working with one of these, it's going to take you a very long time. Now, I'm going to show you quickly. Add a little water. You can go down to your local dollar store, get one of these ketchup things. And if you want to free yourself up a little, have a little fun, you can start to do these sorts of things. Do you see what begins to happen there? I promise you, you can't do this with a pencil. But to show you quickly how a form evolves and how a form develops, you see how we have these cool areas? Now how do we call attention, say, to this? Say, it's simple, you paint around it like that. You might want to go all outs. See what this does? You are suddenly, and pay attention where the wet meets the dry. You see the quality of gray there? And see, I'm trying to match up to my graphite. So we got three media here. We got charcoal, we've got acrylic inks, and we've got pencil. And technically water. And you can gray out an area, gray it out real nice. And like I showed you earlier, you're then free to draw into it. So, to kind of sum up what I'm talking about here, you'll start to see how I got a range. I got some smoother areas. I got some textured areas. I got some very black areas. Got some gray areas. As the piece dries, you'll be able to work back into it. You can, if you see a little, think it needs a little more. Not bad for just a little bit of charcoal, a little bit of ink, a little bit of pencil. So, in closing this up, I want to say a few things here. If you're bringing some drawing into your life, things you want to keep in mind is always look around. I work outside because I see the trees, I see how the sunlight changes. The other thing you'll want to do, spend some time looking at the works of great artists. Now, since I was a teenager, you know, I've looked at the Van Goghs. These are Leonardo da Vinci drawings. You're probably looking and saying, well, I see a head, which is true. But if you look beyond that, you'll see some of the techniques that we went over today. You'll see how he blended to make a shoulder. He's shoving one form up against another form. You're going to see how an area of light goes up against an area of darkness. See the eyeball. He might just as well have used an eraser right there, you know? He probably used a little scratching. He also used a technique that I showed you earlier, rubbing your fingers into the charcoal, into the paper, and you can carve out your forms. So look at the work of great artists. You see? You see what happens here? Why does that nose look like a nose? Because there's some charcoal rubbed into the paper right next to the nose. And he probably went in there with a little bit of an eraser, even a little bit of a knife, carve out the paper. You can look at the drawings of George Seurat, which I can tell you, you look very closely. He drew charcoal, he took a little knife, scratched out some areas. Beautiful, just beautiful work. Okay. That's drawing in a nutshell.